things. So I feel like that's the
La
coolest.
la la.
So since it's communication, what's a good a vocal warm up as we're doing something like this?
I think sometimes we just do breathing, this natural breathing, like inhale, then hold, and then exhale. I do a lot of that. I do yoga, so I like to close my eyes and it's just kind of give myself I'm a visual person, so I need to visualize myself being successful. And then we warm up our vocal cords if you haven't been talking all day.
Mm.
La 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 la
So for those of us
la.
who didn't teach a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Like the Brady Bunch. Yeah, like what was it, a Marsha?
Oh.
He's trying to sing, or it was Peter who lost his voice.
Oh yeah, yeah. The classic 13-year-old. It's great when you do that in the middle of the
Voice
classroom,
change.
or whatever.
Squeaking.
Come on, guys.
Hi.
I think that's great. So yeah, it's fun. Okay, so purpose for this, just to set. So want to like just it was exploring possibilities of integration, but sometimes that's just like also just getting a sense of what your classroom looks like, which is why it's fun to start with the warm-ups. I have to be. It's dangerous for me to start with the close your eyes and visualize yourself succeeding, because that's not usually the thing I visualize. It's best if I, but maybe that's a whole other problem.
That's probably therapy.
Probably something else there.
Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, with that, actually, let me just. I always like to go check and see if it actually went live and if the sound is coming through before I say anything particularly meaningful. There's an assumption there that I would say something meaningful.
Hey, I'm on board for random thoughts.
Okay. So that's coming through. Just. I always like to go check so yeah. Cool. All right. That looks fine.
A D shiner.
A D shiner. I'm like, can I play with it? I don't know. That's it's a good look for you though. But yeah, that's why doing the powder puff. But all right. So okay. So let's just start with who are you? What do you do at the college, and why do you like to do that?
So I'm Michael Bryant, and I teach in COM.
Yeah.
And this semester, COM 100 and COM 225. One is the Introduction to Human Communication.
100 and 225.
And the other one is public speaking.
Okay.
And I've been with the district for since 2001.
Nice.
So more than 1 year, less than 1,000 years.
Almost quarter century.
Almost a handful.
Cow. You're like almost. That's great.
And I've taught in a couple different areas. I have 2 faculty service areas that I teach in, and one is occupational safety and health, and the other one is COM.
So what's the occupational safety and health side look like?
It is so the academic program is the COM, and the other one is more of a CTE type of curriculum. It was at Gateway.
Like a public speaking for
it was a occupational program. So we were teaching people to become safety professionals out in industry, and so I would integrate a lot of hands-on because these individuals were meant to be. So it's a lot of management and a lot of use of technology.
Okay.
So we had a STEM designation, and so there's some math and science courses in which they had integrated into some of our classes in which we had.
So is that part of what? Did you have a background in that area?
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
That's my undergrad is in fire protection and safety engineering.
Really?
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Which is just
how
like
is
communication.
Okay,
right?
I've never heard of that. Just is super cool because like I did 9 years construction, but mine's like throwing cement and block around. And yours sounds cooler.
Yeah. So I teach a construction safety class.
So yeah.
So that's different, but the same as COM because I try to incorporate as much of the COM principles in the class when I can. But it's a different audience with a different focus, but they do make presentations in the class, so I really try to get them to do that. Try to keep it kinetic.
That's cool. So just because I'm not sure, but yeah. So I did 9 years construction. And some of that was like doing throw and block and brick, and some of it was doing inventory control and play with spreadsheets and things like that. At one point, designing playing too much with Excel on the job to the point where I designed an estimator based on engineering plans that the city gave, so that contractors could basically walk in, take the plans, and we'd be able to like do a printout based on their like whatever their dimensions for their wall was. It's like so fun, weird things.
Yeah, I know those
Um,
things. Those
yeah,
things are
yeah.
very useful.
Yeah,
Help
so-
save money and time.
And when like with that, with retaining walls and things like that, it's like in California, it's like just
Oh, you work in
calculating.
California.
Yeah,
so different.
rebar, calculating rebar alone,
Uh-huh.
in earthquake. Like we had so many fights with people. Like, no, you really need this Anyways, that's distraction. But yeah, so that's really cool. I didn't know that you had and it was for you. Was it fire safety and
So I did both. So I was educated in fire protection and safety. So the fire protection was sprinkler design, explosion systems, more the engineering side of it all. And the safety was just protecting people from themselves and from occupational hazards.
okay,
And so I worked in industry, and so I worked with other types of engineers. We did the pre-plan part, and then we did the after it's built, just make sure that we don't hurt anyone,
right?
and then periodically kind of going back and do hazard analysis.
Did you have to ever do stuff like MSDS sheets and things like that?
Yeah, so that's sort of the it's motivated by regulations in some cases, and then corporate policy, and so we have to understand the sort of legal language to understand what the law is trying to say, so we can implement that, and then we would take that and make it so that it's usable on the employee end, make sure they understood so it was at the time, the MSDS, material safety data sheets, and now it's changed to SDS, safety data sheets. So we educate them on those things.
So then, okay, that's really cool. Like I didn't even know that was part of your background. That's exciting.
We'll
Actually,
just keep it inside a little bag.
Sometimes it's like you know,
Pull
being
that
a
when you-
construction nerd, you know, you don't want to share that all as openly. I don't know.
That's kind of cool though. Construction is cool.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then and how often do you teach that kind of thing, or is that like in the past you taught more of it?
No, I'm credentialed in safety, so I have to maintain that. So I teach
Okay.
at Mesa College on Monday nights. I teach 2 sections of a construction safety class at Mesa
Nice.
at night, and it's a late night because my first class starts at 4:20, ends at 7. The other one starts at 7 and ends at about 10 o'clock.
Okay, and then you said you teach COM 100 and COM 225, and that was
do.
like kind of intro to communication and
In public speaking.
and public speaking. Okay, that's the public speaking is the advanced one. Okay,
It is the next step.
200 level.
It's
Yeah. Okay, well, so what are the unique things about like your classroom? Like, what are the things that are kind of exciting for you right now? Because everybody's got their core content. What is it that has been kind of really invigorating as you've kind of been teaching lately?
I try to, as much as possible, get them out of the classroom and get them working on activities. I have this philosophy of just being as kinetic as I can with the curriculum. And so that would be either inviting guest speakers to come in to add to the conversation, or have them leave the classroom to do a work activity, and then we come back and we check in the next class period.
Okay.
So in my COM 225 class right now, today, they're working on a group presentation, their first graded group presentation to present on Thursday.
Okay.
It's a fun activity where they take any item, like a cell phone, water bottle that I have for in 225, I do something similar in 100. 225, I kick it up a notch because they do more speeches in 225. And so so this time I usually have them select the item. I have it up front, they select which one they have. And this time around, I selected the item for them.
Okay.
And I have in this case, 2 duplicate items, and I separate those 2 groups into different rooms and have them plan how they're going to brand that particular item. And they have all the components to the speeching elements, and they have to ensure that the speech has continuity among all the people that are part of the speech, and it has some research parts to it for adding credibility to it. But I want to see the difference, so I put them in a different room so that I can say, here's the same product, I want to see the difference in creativity in the presentations.
Because then you don't have the like, oh, what are they doing?
What are
bleed
they
over
doing?
in the classroom.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we meet on Thursday, I already have the speech order, and they have an opportunity to show me what they're working with.
No song reference intended.
No song reference intended. So that's 225, and so every week I call them adventures. It's not every week, but most weeks we have an adventure. So I'll let them know in advance. I say we have an adventure next week, go until this and this. I don't like surprises, and I don't like to give them surprises. So on the syllabus. I tell them what's gonna happen, and like they really read the syllabus. But I say check the syllabus because we have an adventure next week, and they have to be there in order to get credit for the adventures. There's no makeup for the adventures.
So where do you have? So what is in it? What's some of the cool adventures you have them go? And is it like out off campus or on campus?
On campus,
but-
so they'll do it
okay.
as a group on campus. So I treat our service learning. So all my classes have service learning. So I treat our service learning as one of our biggest adventures that we do in our class. And it depends on the semesters, but I'd like to do it as early in the semester as I can because it brings the class together. The groups of students, they gel during the service learning. So we go to Humphrey Elementary.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the past we've done D Square where we've taken plastic bags and wove mats for the homeless.
Yeah.
We've done
Yeah.
hygiene. This semester, I talked to service learning, so I like to mix it up a little bit because I was starting to get comfortable with that exercise. It's like, I don't really want to get comfortable with it. I kind of want it to be also exciting for me. And so Humphrey we tried it we did that last semester and that was exciting.
Nice.
So we're doing it again.
So, okay. So some of these you said will be on campus. Some of them will be off campus like that.
Yes. And so that's sort of one of our larger adventures that we do. That is, it has a writing component. So it has a service learning component. They have a reflection, and then they have a speech that's tied to it.
Nice.
And so those three components, it's about 15% of grade. So it's pretty significant. I think service learning is important. So I want to make sure they understand why we're doing it and how it connects with the curriculum, and that we have some meaningful outcomes.
Yeah, I was just talking with I think Malden in service learning, or not service learning, in an econ about service learning, because we did the my 8-week class went over to Humphreys this morning. We did their games based on some of their college content crossover, and so we were just over there this morning. But so just because it might help people think about like all the different possibilities of high impact practices and stuff. How do you define service learning? I hear some of the components like practically. So what's your kind of definition of it?
So we pick an organization that is a nonprofit, and we go there, and it's sort of what they want from us. So if they have a need, like last semester we painted the basketball courts. So that was a service that we provided to them. In the past, the service that we provided, if we were doing for our city, painting a house, for example, we would be able to see the homeowners and be able to connect with other people who were also doing service. And so part of that learning was leadership and following. And so it's followership, some of the learning outcomes from that specific activity, and is really individual for the students. So we go out, we provide a service to some part of our community. In that, we ask students to think about the connection between the course and public speaking or introduction to human communication, and following it in areas in which we have already discussed, whether it be small group communication, leadership principles. Maybe they're talking about nonverbal communication, verbal communication, and they figure out how it makes the connections, and then they write about that.
So do you get papers or do you get responses in the reflection, like when they're engaging with the kids, they come back and they go, well, some of the kids seem nervous because they showed these nonverbal cues of like fidgetiness or quietness or something like that?
So for Humphrey, we haven't had a chance to be there when the kids were there, usually during the break.
Okay.
We've gone during spring break when their kids have not been
Gotcha.
there. So in that regards, it's sort of interfacing with, some of the students are a little apprehensive of doing service learning. We asked the question, how many of you done service learning? Only a few hands, or have done community service. Hands are gone up. We explained the difference between community service and service learning. Community service, you're doing good for the public and the community. The difference is that there's outcomes and connected to our class.
Yeah.
And
It's like it's not just
outcomes.
It's we do something, but we do something with that tie back, and usually reflection, like you said, right? You have them do a reflection. What do their speech things look like?
So the reflection usually is tied to. We have time where we do a reflection as a group on site, and then they do a written reflection later. So the reflection, things in which 3 things. I can't remember what it is right now, but it's connection to the curriculum.
Yeah.
And then things in which they have questions for. The impromptu speech is related to, they have actually, I have these cards that have questions on them, question cards, conversation starters. You may have seen those.
Yeah.
The little acrylic bricks. And in there I put blanks. And the blanks represent, they have to reflect on some aspect of service learning. And there's a structure that we give them for doing impromptu speaking. And so they don't know what they're going to pull. They don't know if they're going to pull a question or if it's a blank card. And I have them in groups of 3 in triads. And so we have one person who is reading the question to the peer, one person responding to it, and another person either videotaping or then providing feedback to them. And then they rotate through.
Nice.
And they have a chance to record it again after everyone's gone, but they have to pull a different card.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if they didn't pull
So
service
it's
learning
still
card
on
that
you.
time, it's still impromptu.
Gotcha.
So they have to, so the person I've asked, the group, if you pull a blank card, then come up with something that's reasonable as a STEM question for service learning. Like what, and you can reflect on some of the service learning, some of the questions that we have in the reflection. Like list 2 things that you gain from the service learning event. So it's whatever they felt the connection was. And they're like, I went into it with sort of a bad attitude about service learning because I didn't really think I wanted to be out there and it was hot outside. But in the end, and I share these testimonials with service learning because it shows a change, change in attitude, growth, a little bit of growth in there. That they went in with a sour attitude and they came out like, oh, it was great. I had a chance to meet some new people and a chance to, and that's what we're really trying to do also is get them to gel as a group and communicate and get to know people.
Like in the class.
In the class. One of our activities
yeah.
we do at the beginning of the semester is a perception activity. They have a list of questions related to some like movies and games and things that you may assume about anyone. They have to look at a person without knowing them and have to pick what they think how the person would answer that. They share it with the person. They have a conversation around it. At the end of it, I ask, what could you do in order to, we're talking about perception, in order to know more about a person? They say, well, get to know them, or how could you be more accurate in your assessment? We'll get to know them a little bit more. And then our next activity we
Ask
do.
questions.
You can
like,
ask
what does that
questions,
look like?
right?
Yeah.
So our next activity is outside. We go to the ETC and the Environmental Tech Center, and they do seed starting. And during that, they have a list of questions. They have to find 3 things they have in common and 3 things they don't have in common. So that causes them to talk some more.
So you're doing it's like you're doing a whole lot of like community and team building like throughout these different activities, through the service learning or you call them the adventures, right? So if someone's like listening to all this and they're thinking, well, what would connections to that class what might connections to that class look like? What's kind of the core content in let's say COM 100 as a starting place, just because it's got a large enrollment. So I'm going to play the numbers a little bit here.
Yeah, sure.
But what are kind of the core things you want people to get out of the COM 100 course or those competencies?
Yeah, so the COM 100 focuses on interpersonal, intrapersonal, and small group. So sort of the big thematic themes. And then it's a survey class. It has a lot of different topics. We go through what communication is, verbal, nonverbal, relationships, small group communication. And it terminates with, in my class at least, and we all do it a little bit different with their 4 6-minute speech. And I do that a little different than most. I do that outside. I have them do it outside. So it's mostly tech-free.
Okay.
So they aren't using PowerPoints driving the presentation. They have to find other creative
It's a
ways
lot
to
more
incorporate
like-
visual aids into their presentation.
Do you have them build things?
They can do it any way they
like
want in terms
props?
of visual aids,
Okay.
other than rely on like high tech,
Gotcha.
because it usually doesn't work outside. We have rabbits that pop through and airplanes fly over. And it's like, if you can do it outside, you can do it this way,
But like
you mostly can do it any place.
incorporate a rubber chicken, a hat, a magic wand. I'm just making things up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So it starts with the first day they go out on a scavenger hunt
Okay.
on campus, and I give them areas, and they have to come back to report out like a newscast. And so I want them to realize that we have resources on campus,
Mm-hmm.
and those resources are important for their success. And so I get them early on working as a group, so that for day one, they don't know anyone. So I want them to know, at least know one or two people. So I put them in small groups. They go out on campus, they do their thing, they come back to the next class with their video. We watch it in class, and then I talk about the resources, like DRS, for example. And I talk about how I support that and how I want them to make sure that they are successful in this class. And if you have a plan in high school that you may want to go to DRS, and consider that. And I'm open to whatever the possibilities are. So I want them to know that I'm supportive of it. I also want them to know there's a resource on campus that they should be a part of if they feel as if they need that resource, et cetera. So as we go through that, that's day one. So they kind of get a sense of, okay, this is what this class is going to be like. And so there's a little sense of pressure because, okay, now I need to kind of, it's almost like a performance, right? Because, right? Because what are we doing this week? Well, this week we're going to be lecturing in class, or in class we're going to be doing, what? No adventure? It's like, well, we have to set the context for the next time we go out. Oh, okay.
Where's the fun in that?
Yeah, where's the fun?
I mean, you could always do the like wandering Socratic method style. I had to do it with my mythology class this weekend. But yeah, it's like they were definitely like in the dull, like I'm like I couldn't get conversation started. I'm like, all right, it's been 10 minutes. And I always have this with the mythology one, it's kind of in my back pocket. I know at some point in the semester we're gonna get there and it's dual enrollment. But yeah, kind of that idea of like, you know, when they're like, oh, what are we gonna do? It's like we just walked, and I was like just talking and asking them questions as we went, like got them to talk to each other, but we just kept traveling. We walked over and talked about like mythologies of creation, looking at the ETC garden versus like the desert scape on the other side. Yeah. So well, what I hear you saying is really kind of cool stuff, because you're already doing like you're helping connect them to the web of resources that really anchors them to the college, which is really good for sense of belonging and just knowing you have supports. I hear you doing a lot with collaborative group work or collaborative projects, which is another high impact practice. You're just stacking them already. And even when you're talking about, it sounds like the way you're having them accomplish some of those core, you said interpersonal, intrapersonal, and small group communication, you're kind of putting them in it's really problem-based learning. You're saying you have to go figure this out and do it as a team, right? So then they have to kind of, it forces them into we got to communicate with purpose here. And so they're experiencing those communicative principles. Am I tracking?
Yeah, I think you are tracking, and it's surprisingly, it's more difficult for some students than others. Interacting with one another. And I tell them early on, this is a communication class. And so, when they come in the class, I tell them to find a new home. And they know what that means. That means they need to find a new place to sit.
Like each day they're rotating?
With new people.
Okay.
Not each day, but most days I find that they're starting to form clusters. I need to break it up. And so like, okay, you all sat together enough. So I need to go ahead and not everyone. I'll just say, find a new home. Find someone that you haven't interacted with in class and sit with that person.
That's a really great strategy. One of the things that came up in the literature for learning communities probably a decade, 10, 15 years ago, was this idea of like hyper bonding and the danger when you have students together so much of like if they get into groups and suddenly that group becomes more important, like their ability to communicate to them becomes more important than what's happening in the class and the actual learning. So there were teachers who were concerned about hyper bonding in the classroom, and that is one of the main strategies, is like continuing to shuffle them around. It's like, well, okay, so they're bonding, that's good. If it's becoming a distraction, like get them in the habit of like shifting around so it's not just the two or three. And like I know some of the cool things I hear about hear you describing in your adventures reminds me of what I see when I pair with math. Like math, they do it a couple different ways, but like Pam and Casey, they'll do like the playing card groupings, because they usually have like 30 people in the class. And so a student will walk in and they have to end up being grouped by whatever the card says. So you get this kind of novelty or random chance thing, and it's like, who am I going to be? And it can be both fun and nerve-wracking. But then they're also like, they're doing problem-based learning, because a lot of times, like, have you heard the maths like vertical non-permanent surfaces thing? So basically, like if you go by a math class now, like they started this just before COVID, or maybe a year or two before COVID. But they get all of their students up on their feet like almost the entire class. And so instead of teaching math in a let me walk you through a problem, they get them in groups at the whiteboards. They've actually had like twice as many whiteboards installed in the math rooms. And so like 30 students like wrapped all around the class, standing the whole time, and like they cycle the work, they cycle the markers, and they cycle the groups like all the time. And so like all each class. And so it kind of gets into a place where they're having this like, you know, it's a contrived situation, but it's the best version of it, you know, or a best like one of the models that we could go from, because everything in school at some point there's a we're doing this thing and it's for credit and we want it to be authentic and it is real life, but sometimes we have to put you in situations that are a little more like manufactured, right? Even if it's a true adventure. I try and but so what you're sharing, like I hear parallels to strategies other divisions use, other disciplines use, and so like I'm imagining like even if you and a math class, for instance, linked, that means you don't really even if you did a very soft connection where you just had the same students, so that's what we call like a cohort model, and so it's where the students benefit from being co-enrolled. Even if you didn't like work out all the kinks of content or whatever, or tried to come up with a unified grade or calendar, you could like knowing that that's happening in the math class, it might give you some freedom in how you do your class. You're like, okay, I know you guys have had group. So then it's almost like if the math class happened first, you could have them come into your class doing the reflections. Which is, and so you almost like buy more time because you're not having to orchestrate all the adventures. And that's just one of the things that's kind of popping into my head as we're sitting here talking about it.
Because it does take quite a bit of time to pull all the pieces together.
Yeah.
They're not, I think of myself as well organized in that sense because I need to be able to see it. Work through. I'm not very, I try not to be spontaneous on how these happen. And in my mind, I could, this is what I'd like for it to look like, and this is the end result. So let's just go outside and do this. I don't do well with that because I need to make sure that it connects with what we're working with. Because we do so many adventures, I have to also make sure that we are connecting with the course competencies.
Yeah.
So it's fun, right? They're like having a great time. Like, this is a great time, but there's a reason. I need to make sure we connect those things, and they don't. We talk about what we're going to go do and how it connects, and we come back and we circle back. But I think they enjoy, and I think that they will remember. And I think they will remember the adventures more than they will me talking about any of the items in the class, and which I want.
Yeah, it's like
I remember the things, and when I was in college, I remember the activities and the field trips we went on, and all the things that we did, more than what the person said in class. And it may be subliminal. Maybe
it's all part of anchoring and making the memory meaningful. So trying to find and some students are going to be that more. They're going to gain from those experiences to really like see it, practice it, do it, kind of thing. With that, like you said, there are some days where you do have to kind of deliver content or in some way, shape, or form. What's some of the content what's some of that deeper, more specific communication content that you have to give?
I just think all the topics need a little bit of preamble. Even thinking about if I'm going to work backwards, I put them through an activity, and then afterwards I have to tell them about the activity. In some cases, it doesn't work well that way, so I have to set them up, and I'll tell them, we're going to do an adventure. So it's Monday, and we're doing an adventure on Wednesday, and I have to get you set up for the adventure that we're going to do on Wednesday. So we're going to talk about nonverbal communication. And we talk about the elements of nonverbal communication and what to look for. And our adventure on Wednesday might be to go to the ceramics lab and to take a look at some of the art that's in the ceramics lab, and then try to imagine non-verbally what the artist was trying to communicate and how culture was expressed through their artwork and those things. And they have to be able to connect that with the reading they have. So in some cases it's not that deep. It's just principles, terminology that I need to go over because I want to see that in some of the writing. And I want you to use the words that we're talking about in this chapter. So let's first go over some of these terms and context. And like we were talking about relationships and disclosure this week, this proverbial cross section of this onion and cutting the onion in half. and the outside of the onion is just general information that we share with people. As we get to know one another, then we go a little bit deeper into the onion. So that level of disclosure oftentimes is a give and take. And so that's sort of the visual. And then there some sort of activity that I had them do in parallel with that. Well, let's test that. So I gave them some instructions. I want you to go out into the world, and I want you to find a stranger, which is more difficult for some people than others.
Stranger danger.
Right.
Right. Especially
yeah.
post-COVID,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
little bit harder,
Yeah,
right?
people don't-
It feels like it's a little
Some
more
of
hit or
them
miss.
are like
Yeah.
eager and anxious to go out and do this activity, and some are like, I just don't talk to people. Well, it's going to be a challenge for you, but I want you to try, and I want you to write about how that experience went. So the first experience, there are two people. The first one was having a general conversation. Hi, how's it going? And I explained to them how you start a conversation with a person. So I'm like, how do you get started? Maybe you ask for directions to a building. Maybe you compliment somebody on their shirt. Maybe they have a band shirt on, and then you start that as a conversation, and then it goes from there. And then you just back away from the conversation. And the next one is you start the general conversation, and then you add some information that you would not normally add to a stranger. So don't make it anything weird, but and we're talking about the weather, and then you talk about you had appendicitis and you had surgery,
Yeah,
something like that, right?
going so
And see what the
personal, yeah,
reaction
yeah.
is. If they have some sort of empathy for you, or if they share something equal, then that sort of demonstrates that I trust you now and you trust me, and so I'm going to give you some little bit more information. But typically, it doesn't happen that way on a new connection with a person. Usually, a person is like, "Whoa, that's a lot of
That's a lot,
information you just
yeah.
share with me. I don't even know you." And so we're looking for the nonverbals of
Like,
wanting to escape and get away.
versus like someone who's like excited to actually have a little more intimate conversation, like leaning in or something.
Yeah. So we did the debrief, and some of them have, like 15-minute conversations with a stranger.
That's cool.
So to tie back what you're saying is, so the concepts aren't, some of them are theories that we jump into.
Yeah.
And we talk about what the theory is, and we talk about the components and the terminology we use for the theory. And then, all right, let's test that and see how well it works. And let's add that to this next thing that we're going to do, which is about how people see you and how you see yourself as an activity.
Yeah.
And then we build that into the next section, which is it's almost like scaffolding, but we don't use the same. We aren't building up to something big, but these concepts are they complement one another. So
Yeah.
if we start talking about relationships, remember that assessment that you did earlier, and we talked about these things. Well, that's also important for relationships. This whole thing we were talking about disclosure is also important for when you're working in groups or you're at work.
Yeah. Well, that's so as you're describing some of those, like I hear a couple, like I think of like different environments where having the nonverbal cues, actually, I have some thoughts on that question too. I'll ask the question first. So when you're looking at, say you went into the ceramics lab, are you treating, and you're talking about nonverbal communication. So are you almost analyzing those as like textual artifacts, as like nonverbal communication representation of the artist, embodiment of the artist?
Yeah, so we do two. We do either the art gallery if they have an exhibit,
Okay.
and then, or if we don't have an exhibit, then I'll ask Michael if we can use the gallery. Usually there's some art going on inside there. So I have a couple of different activities that I can use to tie in for nonverbal. We've done games, nonverbal Pictionary, for example.
Okay.
How can we
So
demonstrate
it allows you to engage with a variety of other kind of texts that are a little more, that aren't just kind of verbal communication, but also not just nonverbal in like body language reading either.
Yeah, I think it's the tone in terms of, so we consider paraverbal, nonverbal, the way you say words
Okay.
is considered nonverbal. Obviously, body, language, clothing,
Okay.
so artifacts,
And then anything.
tattoos,
Okay. Yeah.
all the
Okay.
things like that. It say something about you.
So that's where your fashion club role comes in, I guess.
Possibly.
A little bit.
Yeah, possibly.
Or that's
Possibly.
just something fun
Possibly.
you did.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But okay, so that's cool because like when I'm teaching my writing class, I'll be doing, we might talk about like ambient rhetoric or the rhetoric of stuff. Sometimes we talk about rhetoric embodiment and kind of how like some of that visual rhetoric components will be analyzing other text, and then sometimes it gets us into discussions about kind of visual presentation, whether that's skin color or eye color or some other thing, right? So fashion and whatnot. So I was curious about like what that looked like. On the when you were talking about kind of having that those conversations with kind of strangers, I was thinking the possibility, like one thing I do in my mythology class, and I know we also have like, I think it's Kezia Williams and Malik Toms and John Dean might all teach this, the mythology class too. I don't know if they use this strategy, but like one of the things I do is I have students like speed date as the different characters from the mythologies, and like, okay, yeah, so that's a fun, but I was thinking like, so I'm trying to think of like how, like making your class even more efficient again, like, so like if your comm class is paired with a mythology class, and they go from having this like, well, we're trying to learn the myths and mythologies and characters, so we're doing the speed dating thing, and then they come into your class talking about nonverbal cues, and it's like, okay, well, what like in that speed dating context, like what were all the visual cues were you able to watch, and how did people's body language shift, you know? Or even more like the other way around, like if they learn about nonverbal cues like that and go into a speed dating like as a Greek goddess or whatever situation, and it's like, well, what kind of now I'm thinking like there was a book called Cues by, I can't remember her name, but anyways, but like the student then trying to like better role play the character because they know the body language things now. So part of it is like, how would this character embody? How would I embody this character? What cues would Aphrodite versus Hera, you know, present?
Yeah, or any leader in that realm, right?
Yeah, so actually that could be
sense of confidence and vocal tone.
Could you, so you know, you could even, if someone wanted to like do, if it's a history class and they're learning about historical figures, political science people, like they're trying to play different politicians, like there's a lot of crossover where if you're trying to integrate just that one piece, like there's a lot of different places that people could try and like practice what it looked like to embody. And so I think that's how some of those nonverbals might show up. Would they have a different tone? You could even go into voice acting with or theater performance and say like, but I guess then, you know, all the world's a stage. So then when they're going, and so then having that as a dual lens when they're going into those conversations, like that could benefit the other class just as much as yours. And so
I think there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
It's just how you make those connections. And sometimes I am always interested in knowing how other people do things.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the way I'm doing it now. It doesn't mean I'll do it next semester the same way, but I like to try it a few times and try to iron it out. And then, but it'd be nice to
decide if it's a B+ or an A-.
You know, I want to really know. Yeah,
adventure.
right. Is it worth doing, or is there something else that'd be more beneficial for the students? In some cases, it just lays flat because the student's interest in it. And then I'd say, well, I'm not going to give it up. I'm going to try it again and see if it works next semester. The students will like it.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons I like kind of it's highlighting for me is like, I think sometimes people think about integrative learning or learning communities or even service learning, and they'll go, this is so much work, because sometimes it is. We have really great service learning. Like the amount of work that Katie Har and Ashley do over there has been so helpful. Like since 2016, they've been helping me with classes or earlier. And so, but thinking about it like this, where it's like, you know, sometimes it's seen as more work to think like, how do I pair with a partner? You know, how do I find a partner? How do, you know, is it going to be more work to develop curriculum with them, that kind of thing? And so trying to think of like, not just the workload you might gain by trying to connect with another person, but especially by the sound of it, like someone more like you, where you're planning everything out already. You know, then it's just scheduling. And so then if you plan everything out already, you might actually not have to put in, I don't want to say not as much effort, because I don't want it framed negatively, but it might not be as much work in one sense because you've got the other experience kind of built in from the other professor. And so so sometimes when I'm listening, I'm like, oh, you know, that actually might save effort on the part of the professor, and it allows you to kind of buy time to do some of the other work that learning communities might involve too. I really like, do you do, well, I think I was going to ask about context, subtext, and text, but we kind of talked about that a little bit with some of the other things. Well, if you're thinking about what are some possible combinations like you've thought about for your class that might be good in the past? Or have you had a chance to like even think in that direction? Like if I were going to pair with somebody, if I were going to spend all semester with a class, if I were going to, you know, go fully integrated, which is like the most extreme version of a learning community, what would be your like your subject of choice, class of choice, or are you more of like a relational, like I've got friends
Mhm.
and they're not in low places?
Some of them are. And you can't talk
Now I
about
got the country song.
I love me some Garth Brooks. He's actually from Stillwater, Oklahoma, and that's
Okay.
where I went to college, in Stillwater, Oklahoma. So he was my first country western um, person that I saw. And so after that, it was like, okay,
really
country's
cool.
not so bad, but he was a crossover kind of.
I grew up in, I was born in Oklahoma City and grew
Oh,
up in
okay, see.
Norman, and
Okay.
before I went to Texas
Yeah.
when I was 10. So my mom went to OU for a year or two.
Boo.
Well, she only went away. She came away with I think 27 credits after
Mhm.
like actually it was like 3 years,
Uh-huh.
and it was a rut. Like she didn't get the degrees she wanted, but it
Mhm.
did help us kind of stay out of some poverty regions for a while.
I have a good friend from Edmond.
Yeah, yeah. At one point, my step grandma lived in Edmond.
Mhm.
Yeah, so she gave me a. So when I was 6, she gave me a tape called "On the Rap Tip," 1991. Had Funky Cole Medina, me myself. She's like, and I remember like I got this as like I had that tape till I was like 17. I don't know where it is now, but like I listened to that so much, and like it made art. Like I really enjoyed like the Iron Man of rap was a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Anyways, in that one. But these are songs that maybe a 6-year-old probably shouldn't be listening to.
It made you the man you are now.
It made it much easier made Eminem much more palatable when I was 13, right? But it was actually I really enjoyed it. So it kind of those old school rap. Anyways, but
Some classes that I think that I would connect with.
yeah, sorry, that was the point.
Yeah,
I
no,
got
it's fine.
distracted.
Which classes? And that's interesting because initially I was thinking about contextualized learning
Yeah.
and possibly going to CTE programs and whether it be aviation and do like a 225 for
Yeah.
aviation students. And then I think, well, if I were to, and because Anthony Brodden and Vanessa Sandoval, I believe
Yeah.
both have done some form of community.
Mhm.
And so I said, well, and I was talking to them a little bit about it. And I was talking to Buzzy about the work in which he's doing with communities. So the answer, don't know. Because I know Buzzy was looking for a partner for photography, and in my mind, I'm just trying to think about how that would connect. And I think it would. To me, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So I think that we can work it out together. Just thinking fully integrated will take a lot of time.
It can. It can. When you're imagining it taking a lot of time, what's kind of the like maybe too much?
Well, I'm thinking it's a summer project. I'm
Okay.
thinking that it's a dedicated, for me, the way that I need rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go into it without having at least a little bit of understanding. So I probably would take a semester of sitting in the class,
Okay.
the other person's class, to look at it first and see how it flows.
To try, because you're really trying to fine tune like piece by
Right.
piece by piece.
I need to be able to see how I would connect. And so just reading the curriculum for me is not enough.
Yeah.
I need to see how it's delivered. Okay, I want to
Which
see.
explains why you emphasize experiential learning, because it makes
So,
sense. Yeah.
So to me, I learn that way best by seeing and doing. So I want to experience it myself. So I would probably I would put myself in the class. So
Yeah.
I can just be a student.
I can see why that would
fly on
be
the
a
wall in the back.
yeah. That would feel like a lot of work.
And then I would then start to figure out how I could, what would make sense. I mean, not just me alone, but
Mhm.
me and the other facilitator, how we could,
Yeah.
how would that make sense for us to do?
When can you weave together things and stuff? Yeah.
Right.
Because so when I taught with chemistry, we've done it a couple different ways. There are some days, and math, this is true with a variety of my teaching partners. Like we will work out like especially with Pam and Casey, because they're more like we want to know the plan ahead of time.
Mhm.
And so it's really like we would sit at the beginning of the semester, like at the beginning of every semester we would sit and go through like day by day and like break it down 5 to 10 minutes at a time. When are we shifting? Do we need to shift? And some days it would be like, you know what? We gave them like 3 days of like really integrated content. They might need a break. So then why don't you just take the normal math time and whatever it looks like, it looks like. And then some days, and so kind of having that like a fully integrated doesn't necessarily mean it's always like every 15 minutes we switch subjects. Sometimes it's just you sitting in the back heckling the other professor about like, and I say that playfully, but it's more like, you know, adding in context, and it's like, you know, being the best version of a student, like asking the critical questions from your lens, content wise. Hey, that kind of reminds me of this thing. Is that true, or am I seeing that right? So that's how we kind of stumbled when I was teaching chemistry. That's how I stumbled on an application for like genres of writing, because we just got done teaching genres and how they're types of communication with socially agreed upon norms or conventions and that kind of thing. We were looking, okay, well, is there a common structure? Is there common information? Does stuff show up in the same place every time? And then it was like within sometime within the week I was teaching that, we ran into his his common equations for chemistry, like combustion, it's been a while, redox, and whatever, the various pieces, and things would always be in the same place. Like when he broke down the formula, it was like a plus b equals ab kind of things. And so it's like that, it made me realize like equations are genres of writing with common structures. And then when you get the individual text, so I say that to say, like, some of it like happens as you're exploring. And so it's one of those things, like, if you know what your normal thing is, and like your long-term plan is like 4 semesters from now, I want to have like a streamlined, fully integrated LC where we're just back and forth and everything's smooth. It's like, well, that means like maybe the first semester, it's just, maybe we do a link to the first time, so there's not the pressure. And when we have time, we jump in on each other's class. But maybe we take the time to align an assignment or 2 or 3, but we still have the same students and we can kind of riff off each other just kind of without them in the room necessarily. Or it's like, you're always welcome, but you don't have to be here kind of thing. And so you kind of think of like scaffolding your own like long-term plan for that. And so then it spreads out the work across a few semesters and you kind of build up to it. Cause yeah, there are a lot of, sometimes I think because for the last 10 years, like LCs primarily on campus have been like, we do privilege the fully integrated. Sometimes that ends up feeling like the perfect version and a lot of work. And writing process that I lean into is like, you throw something on the page, you get it moving, you build some momentum, and then you keep polishing and polishing, because there will be a deadline sometime, but it's not here yet. And so every time there's a draft, it's like, or a new iteration with teaching. So I could be kind of the opposite end of the spectrum of teaching, from like planning everything out minute by minute to like, I can walk in and just go, and it's like, well, what are you guys struggling with right now? And then riff off, like I could walk into a classroom and riff off that and be okay, which throws people off sometimes. Yeah, so there's some strengths and weaknesses and struggles on my part there, but that could be, so then it's like, if it's not the fully integrated, which might feel like a lot of work, which is, especially with the vision like you have, like I want to make sure like that everything matches, and that's like a good heart, right? What do you see as the first step you would take?
I think the first step towards fully integration,
just toward any sort of integrating of content with another professor.
Just having a conversation around outcomes.
Yeah.
In philosophy, because if I really do appreciate being able to take students out of the classroom, to experience the world that we've created around us, a little micro community that we have here on campus, and our little culture that we have. So sometimes and I've told the students, like, if there's ever a campus activity, then we're going outside, because I want them to experience being here on college, and they're in a classroom, and then there's a club fair, for example. I want them to experience a club fair. So I know that in advance, and so I'll create an activity that's related to what we're doing in the classroom, and then they have to go to the club fair, and there's something that they have to do to connect that, because I really want them to not just learn the material, but also be good citizens of the campus and know what's going on and be a part of a club. Right? Right. Keep them here on campus.
I think that's really good. I think, because sometimes, like, I've had students, like, when I've walked them out of, like, even the thing, like I mentioned with my mythology, where I'm just walking them 100 feet from our classroom. They're like, I've never been this over to this part of the college. And it's like, they're dual enrollment students, but they're also dual enrollment students who have been here doing courses on campus on Saturdays for a couple semesters. And they're just like, no, what is this place?
Yeah, right. I'm surprised. Like, you don't know where, I know, I don't know where the restrooms are either.
Right.
To answer your question, is, I think the first thing is, I just want them to understand a little bit about what I enjoy about teaching and what I try to do in my class to get them to have an experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't, I've really not really have ever thought about sharing that
Mm.
with other people before, because it's not a secret, but I'm not doing anything that's earth shattering. But what I'm doing is, it feels good to me.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm doing the right thing for the right reasons. Some of it is maybe a little unorthodox, but I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
okay. I'm in my classroom. The students, I think they enjoy it as well.
Yeah, I think when, especially when so here's some lore drop on learning communities, or like tagging the scholarship a little bit. One, those are two really good best practices that you just mentioned, like compare competencies. Like we do speed dating in some of our, when we're getting people, trying to stir people up. So speed dating with course competencies is a really fun thing, or something like it. But yeah, comparing course competencies, comparing teaching styles, like we have a survey of that. The other part of it is like, part of developing learning communities for students means that, like, we as faculty, one of my favorite parts of this, and it's anchored to the scholarship too, is I get to grow from how they teach. I would not be as systematic of a teacher if I hadn't taught with Pam for so many semesters, right? She, and sometimes that's because she can't, like, in the best way possible, she sometimes is like drill sergeant-y, like in a good way. Like she's very good about holding me accountable to things I say, or reminding me, and that's great. So for me, like, the kind of professional learning community that happens is a core fun part. And it's just like, we can do class so much alone sometimes, even when we've got cool things going on, that it can be like, we're only seeing students, especially after COVID, in hybrid situations. Like, we're only seeing students an hour and 15 minutes a week, possibly. And then, so that's like maybe 7 or 8 hours, unless we do something else, right? And that's us primarily in the classroom. And sometimes if we're facilitating, like you mentioned, like we're trying to get them to interact, which means we're not interacting as much. We're kind of making sure they're interacting instead of doing the, like, we're having the conversation. So all that to say is, like, there's a core benefit that does come when we co-teach, and especially for like I found myself saying things like you did, like, I'm not doing anything particularly amazing, but you are, just for the record, like, but there's also the, like, you're enacting your expertise in a way, and that specifically, like, some of the teaching practices that your discipline specifically, like, values, or that the school and active learning, like the best practices, and how they show up in your class, in ways that other disciplines might not have been able to explore. Like, they want to do active learning, or they want to do experiential or service learning, but whether they're new faculty, or they've just really had to focus on, like, just surviving and they've got an expectation of what their discipline looks like. Sometimes just having you in the classroom, and you getting to, like, them getting to be part of your experiment, or your unorthodox approach, like, that's one of the values that, like, you can bring to situations like that. Like, Mike in chemistry has 28 outcomes that his students are on the course 28 course competencies on his list for Chem 130. So it's like, and a lot of them are like define, analyze, define, name, and then some of them are others. But when we first started talking, he's like, I want to bring writing back into science. I want it to be something valued. He's like, the only writing class I had as a college student was Alice in Wonderland themed, and that was the whole course. And he's like, so I don't know what it's going to look like, but it'd be great if they could write better science lab reports, but also, like, just anything. And so we brainstormed some stuff, and he tried for like 2 years to find a teaching partner before they grabbed. I'm a terrible eavesdropper. So someone was having another conversation at like a developmental writing meeting, and I'm like, what? Anyway, so just background. But when we got into the classroom, like, he got to enjoy, like, we were able to find the back and forth so that chemistry could get involved in kids' books. And he had always been able to he always wanted to do something like that. And he would have them do these, like, poster presentations, but only for extra credit, because he didn't feel like he could make it part of the official class. And so sometimes it's like pairing up with someone and giving them that, like, well, I'm going to take this from you, so you can take some of this from me. And maybe that makes my class feel a little more structured, and maybe that makes their class feel a little more relaxed, or a little more experiential. If most of the time they feel like they have to get through these lectures, and you show them how to make it a little more active learning, there's a really good professional learning community thing that, and just kind of, what's the old saying, as iron sharpens iron. So man sharpens the countenance of his friend, I think is the proverb. So yeah, but
Yeah, I look for it. I like watching other people present and having. I learn from watching others, and so I don't remember Scott's last name, but he's doing the high impact practice in the classroom.
Adamson
Adamson
in
yeah.
math,
Yeah, yeah,
he does like calc and stuff.
yeah. So I did the first session, and now I won't be able to make the second session, but I enjoy
Right.
just hearing what other people are doing and then just picking little pieces up and sort
Yeah.
of weaving them in. So I would not. I'd say that, and it might be a little bit of just. I want to see other people, so that like in the modeling part, I just want to see how they deliver, and so that I can learn from that. And I don't think I'm as consistent though in terms of how I deliver each of my same activities. And so it's one of the things that I want to be more conscious of if I did a learning community is, okay, you need to be, and I have co-facilitated before in a professional setting.
Yeah.
So I understand what it's like to be with another person and
run
tag
the
back
room,
and
yeah,
forth and
yeah.
go back and forth. So I've done that before. I just haven't done it over a semester.
Yeah. It it ends up being whatever you guys both can accept. It becomes, as far as how relaxed you can be in the class, like building that trust over time. Like the more you get to the end of the semester, assuming there's any sort of like chemistry at all or, overlap of values and like trust that can develop, which we usually try to make sure that that's there in the first place. That like it makes the semester, it becomes like this, like you can, for better, like you can praise, you can be excited about the same cool things students do, or they'll see something that they'll see growth in a student you couldn't see because your lens is so used to seeing, like your personality connects with this type of student usually, and they're connecting with the student in a different way. And so sometimes that there's just all these fun things that happen along the way, either commiseration because you're both sad you have to drop the same student because they had something go on and you're not alone and you understand, and like you don't have to walk someone through like, or the whole problem the student shared because they've shared it with both of you. Sometimes it's that, like you have the commiseration. Sometimes it's, wasn't it cool to see how they started here in both our classes and got to here by the end, or really locked in week 5 or whatever it is. And so it's just a really fun experience. I think one thing I do here is like, there's also there's sometimes it can be nerve-wracking to think of being accountable to performing well the whole semester and not saying anything stupid in front of another professor.
Yeah. There's a professional witness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it does feel that way. And I think there's that's where that's like, you want a teaching partner who you guys, you get a sense of like what might happen in the classroom. And you both know, you can talk about how you handle something if it makes you uncomfortable. It's like that praise in public, pound in private model and that sort of thing. And I've had teaching partners where I'm like, I had to go in after the class, I'm like, to be honest, like the way you talk to that student, like one of the best students in the class, but if that, and you kind of, it felt like it was a little degrading. Like if that had been my wife or my sister, or my daughter, I probably would have been a little upset about that. And like having those kind of hard conversations, but still trying to keep the rapport, and like that's one of the really cool benefits, frankly, is like, but
I never thought about that.
not to make it scary.
I didn't think about that, and I also didn't think about them receiving 2 different grades.
That can vary. That depends. So so as far as grading, so leaning into logistics, and you say, are you good till 2:30? It's 2 o'clock right now.
I'm good till about 2:15.
Okay. So there are a couple ways with grading. So if you do just a barely linked, like you've got the same cohort, you're going to line up an assignment or two so that each of you have pieces to a shared assignment. Like the individual grades in each of the classes can be separate. And even if you did a shared Canvas shell in that kind of situation, but most of the assignments were different, that's a possibility where you have, the other thing is having an assignment that shows up in both your classes, but with different emphases. So like, you pair with Buzzy in Art 131 and say he usually has some sort of first unit or 5-week reflection of some kind. And as part of that, like you usually have some sort of reflection about the same time. Well, when they're reflecting in his art class and photography class, maybe they're reflecting with the photography lens, and on your side they're reflecting with a communication lens, and you guys merge that assignment, and either you have like a shared rubric in the same Canvas shell, or you have two assignments where they're two different assignments and two different Canvas shells, where they submit the same project, but you have different criteria that you're grading for than he does. And so sometimes that's all it is. Like the lowest possible connection is students enrolled in the same classes and no interaction with each other from a professor standpoint. So the next level up is students enrolled in the same classes, and one or two or three assignments, or a day where we swap or coordinate, or maybe at the beginning of the semester we agree, I'm not going to have an exam or a major project due the same week you do. And that just, if nothing else, it streamlines the students' work. And we'll talk, maybe we'll talk a little bit, just that might be enough to say, hey, I know that his project one is about this. So I can kind of, when I'm giving an example in class, I contextualize or I inflect my class, and that's super easy. But yeah, so so I've done like the full spectrum of like linked to fully integrated. Like we have multiple assignments and drafts with both people in the assignment grading, Mike grading the kids book for its chemistry content and accuracy, me grading it for visual design and kind of language and polish, or whatever the rubric was. Like we've done that where for almost every major assignment sometimes. And then other times it's more split, where like with math, they've got all of their exams, and then basically that we only have a little bit of crossover topically on the projects. Or we'll theme, like if they're giving examples, they might theme it toward something that is already happening in my class, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of range, and I think sometimes we don't see the possibilities of range, partially, like I said, because our history here at CGC is really emphasizing the fully integrated and not necessarily seeing what the scaffold up to that might look like, or the on-ramp, I like to call it. But yeah.
So when you're not fully integrated, the expectation is to become fully integrated?
Not necessarily. There's some classes there's some classes that just doesn't work. We were talking with, I want to say it was the performing arts field of interest, or division.
That's ours.
Michaela Church? Yeah.
Yeah, that's calm.
Not Michaela. Sorry, I have someone else I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So common fine arts. So some of the fine arts classes, the theater classes, didn't have co-enrollments at high numbers. And so it was more like, how can we make sure those students show up? And so it's like, well, how can we give them that experience? Because they'll never have enough enrollment to run a fully integrated course of like 30 or 20 or whatever it is. And so that's where we have, so it's not always the goal, and we have at least two other options. We can set up a version of an LC that is based on common intellectual experiences, where we know our schedule works or overlaps, and so we kind of, different students, but we put them together and we share a time together. Like if your comm class overlapped with one of the theater performance classes, so you get students who are in both the classes, and you just tell them to show up to the same place, so they do the same adventure together basically, and that allows some crossover, but they don't have to be co-enrolled. So that's one option.
Okay.
The other option is, and we haven't been able to really explore this substantially, but I call it a pocket LC. It's the same thing we do for honors. It's you reserve 5 to 8 seats so it doesn't break the course or anything, and you say those 5 to 8 seats, those have to be co-enrolled. But it can stay a linked course where it's just the co-enrollment. We don't have to fully lean into the crossover of the academic content, but we might have, for those 8 students, we might give them just a little splash of contextualization, since we know they're in both classes. And then the people who are regularly enrolled, who aren't crossovers, it'll just feel like extra flavor to them. But the ones who are in both classes, it'll be very meaningful, the connections that they're making. So they'll get the benefits of a soft linked LC.
So what do you call it?
So it's a pocket LC is what I usually call. I call that version. And then the other one's like common and intellectual experiences. And that could be professor swaps, sharing a schedule, sharing an adventure, kind of like doing one of the things you already do, but together.
Pocket LC sounds, I like it.
Yeah.
I want some pocket LC.
Yeah, because then you can do a soft link and you can see what it's like to have shared students, and what it's like to kind of gently lean toward the other class without it being the whole class is dedicated to that. You get some of the benefits. The only challenge, and because we haven't experimented with it, so the only possible challenge I can foresee is it might be a little more like, in some people might see it as like creating 2 courses for the price of 1. Like I'm creating a course for 8 people, like a unique experience for them. So it might feel like a different, like I'm having to do extra work to build that. But it also might be a good way to like do a little bit over time. So, because yeah. So, but no one's really, I haven't been able to get anyone to lean into it. It's been a theoretical option right now. But we have other versions. We have honors sections that dedicate enrollment to it. And so that works really well, especially for classes that don't have full class enrollment, and we don't want to break someone's faculty schedule and have them steal a course from a faculty adjunct or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So that's an option. Those are some of the, like, there's a lot more options sometimes than people realize, I think. But often the starting place for the on-ramp is like, can you find someone you like who has a schedule similar to yours, and you guys do, like, to use your terms, a shared adventure, a shared service learning project. If it's, especially if it's something you were already gonna not do during normal class time, can you not do it during normal class time in a way that lines up with the other class?
And I also suspect that if we had a relationship, we can build a course.
Yeah.
If we could justify having enough students in that class.
Yeah.
So if it's during a time that we don't normally offer a class, okay, let's try it if it works with the other class.
Yeah. And I usually would dig into some of the tools we have for data, and we could do that if you want. Or I can just send it to you because we only have a few minutes left. I'll send you like COM 100, probably one of the top paired courses with a bunch of stuff. Like there's your COM 100 course probably has a ton of options for fully integrated, easy to build LCs. Like if you told me, I bet I could. I'll check art. Art's a little harder to find, but if you gave me like 3 different disciplines you might be interested in, I bet at least one of them has something like 200 co-enrollments, and you only need what, 20 to 25? What do we?
Yeah.
What's your
About
LC?
Yeah, 25 is
25 now. Yeah.
how many seats we have in the classroom.
Yeah, and so whatever the course cap is, right? So, and so if you want to, with COM 100, there's tons of options. Like you could, I could probably find a pairing with a science class. I could probably find a pairing with humanities or arts class. Like it wouldn't be too terrible.
So it is. So do students drop one and keep the other? Like I don't want a math, but I just want to keep the comm.
It depends. In a fully integrated, no. In a fully integrated, they have to choose both, either or. They either choose to stay or choose to go for both. And that's something that's like more of a nuance that can happen, but doesn't happen so often. If it's linked, then yeah, then someone goes, okay, I can't keep up with both these classes. I'm going to get rid of this math class, but I'm going to stay in my comm class or whatever it is. And we that's the benefit of doing a linked community is you don't have to have the fully integrated grade book. If you are, you tell them from the beginning, or you decide to make the accommodation along the way, yeah.
You know, it sounds like there could be, and there's that 6 credit hours. There's a lot of work outside the classroom for students. I mean, it's the same amount of work because they have to. I mean,
that's the thing is everybody thinks it's going to be more work. There's like, oh, that's not more than they're already taking. And some people will say like, well, LCs, like I've heard some people say LCs are more work. Faculty who have taught them before. Some people have said they should be less work. It's often marketed as less work. It shouldn't be more work in my opinion if you're following like the CGC or national standard guidelines of like how many hours a student should be working. Like there should be a max at least that's reasonable. And it's 3 hours in person, 6 hours out or whatever, you know. But the less work, it shouldn't be less work, but it is, if you're pairing, LCs tend to be more efficient because you're getting a lot of the gen eds are covered in both classes. So when you start seeing, oh, that's covered in that class, I don't need to lean into that as hard because I see it. I know they're getting this from the other side. So I can relax about that and spend more time on the content for my class.
That'd be nice.
Or the crossover. So, and again, even if all you do is say, we're not going to have major projects or exams due week 8 because it's midterms, that suddenly makes the student have a lower spike of stress, right? It may be a higher burn across the semester, but it's lower spikes of anxiety, stress, and potential like tipping point to failure. So it shouldn't be more work, though some people will use LCs to kind of get more work out. Um, it's rare. But it's not going to be less. It's not going to be less work. It's going to be a more efficient work for the students.
Yeah, I heard students 2 weeks ago talking about LCs
Mm.
and how they much this was a buzzy LC.
Okay. Yeah.
And how much they enjoyed it.
Mhm.
Said you should take, and it was suggested to another student that they should take one.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Well, if you if there are they still in your class?
I can't remember who it was, but I'll try to remember who the person was.
So, so you can go back on the YouTube channel. I have done student interviews in the past like this, but like past you did an LC last year. What was it like? And kind of draw out what their experiences felt like. So if you've got someone who's plugging LCs already who might be interested in doing an interview with me, like that's one of the things we mentioned at the LC committee meeting last. Like I'm happy. I want to do get student voices in here too. And what's great is when they share things that I didn't expect, either for good or bad.
Yeah.
Whether it's if it was my student, Greg, you really did take a while on grading. I'm like, oh, that's on live stream. But other times it's like I learned how to develop community, and then we realized like as they went into classes the next semester where they didn't have the same infrastructure built, they became the source of the infrastructure. They experienced the positive benefit in a learning community of building, like connecting, grabbing people's text messages, like getting in a group text with 6 or 10 people. And one of them's like, oh, I was in, it was only like 10 people. It wasn't a big group chat. I'm like, who are you hanging out with? I can't get 5 people in a group chat sometimes. Anyway, all that to say, like some of the student interviews have come back and they're like, I knew that experience from having the LC in the fall, and then it got really lonely in the spring.
Yeah.
So within 2 weeks, I'm like, who are you? What's your number? Oh, let's talk. And like they're the ones instigating developing little micro communities of 4 or 5 people in a class that was full lecture. The instructor didn't ever have them connect, and they're like, we need support. Why don't you help me? I help you. Like what that? And so it becomes a really interesting, like long term. It's interesting how. Sorry, this is random. No, it's not random. But students and faculty tend to who are involved in learning communities step into leadership. So my interviews with students have shown that multiple of them have gone into classes that were not active learning classes and not community oriented classes and created and sparked the community. Faculty, we started looking at it in the fall and then last spring too. We started tracking how many people who started in learning communities ended up taking over as lead of an area, as division chairs, as deans, as VPs, and it is incredibly high on the number of people. Like if you're involved in a learning community, there's just something that happens that makes you more aware, and whether that's you are already going to lean into leadership roles or whether it gives you an insight into how other people work or different connections, it's an interesting thing to follow, both for students and for faculty who get involved in LCs.
So you heard from him, get an LC, get a leadership job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty compelling, but to me at least. But yeah, well, so do you have any what other questions do you have about LCs if we had to rapid fire them?
Okay, so the question that I had the most was the amount of time, fully integrated versus partially integrated. I like the pocket concept, so I don't think that would probably work best for me. I can't think of any questions that I have for you.
Okay.
It's more of now I need to think about it.
Okay.
So I need to think about what that may look like. And what are next steps for a person?
So if you're like, I want to do an LC, there is a cycle to them. For instance, like someone who wants to do spring of next year and needs a schedule built, we usually want to know about this time of the spring semester in advance. Even if it's a soft commitment, like I think I'd like to try and do a pocket LC because scheduling has to build some of that with this other class. And if you're not sure who that teacher is, we can get the ball rolling with just a soft agreement. And the worst case is they just don't activate some of the other pieces. the same thing with the fall. If you want, it's a fall to fall. So if you're like, I want to do a fully integrated or I want to do a linked in fall, you wouldn't usually do it this short notice for this fall. It would be, you've got to let us know by the first week of October for fall 26. So it's usually on the ones that aren't just finding alignment, which you can, mash up another course for one day, like, share an adventure or share a service learning project. That can happen anytime. Ones that we want to get students co-enrolled in and have a pocket cohort or a full cohort of linked or integrated students, we usually have about a year, 9 to 12 months out on those. But it's also like, if you told me Friday, or even maybe the Monday after spring break, that you're like, I thought about it. I'd love to do a pocket LC of like 7 students in my comm class with this other person who I know really well, or Buzzy in the spring with one class that he has. If the enrollment didn't make for that pocket LC all the way, you'd still already have the other course running, and it's a great way to. So then you guys would still have the year, and we could have scheduling start to build it. And if it ends up you're like a month or two later, you're like, wait, all right, hold on, no, Bezzy says it doesn't work. We just deactivate those other pieces if people haven't, because we're out far enough.
So last question, but if when you have the 2 classes together and you have particular assignments that are aligned, and what was my question? I forgot my question.
Integrating assignments.
Yeah, I know. Totally forgot what what I was trying to aim at in the end. Let me just talk about this. So the development of the learning communities is on our own time?
It depends. So for instance, we've got this semester, for people we know are teaching partners, we were able to get funding from SLSC for, I think it's like 12 or 16 hours. I think it's 12-hour, for 2 2-hour workshops, and then I think 8 or 10 more hours in the summer. So they're going to get professional development funds from SLSC to build the LCs, because we know they're coming up in the fall or spring of next year. That's a this year for sure. We're currently working out funding models. It used to be like, if you were linked, you might get 1 or 1.5 credit hours to do the work. And then, or if you were doing fully integrated, it was double loaded. And so, but that we found out couldn't happen because we were violating the faculty agreement. So we've been negotiating with VP Hardy and others. The deans are all having the conversation of how much money we can give. You don't necessarily have to do it on your own time. With enough notice, we are trying to offer professional development options. They're not always paid, but they'll be there. Like, I'm offering 2 brown bags this semester. One of them's on integrating assignments across disciplines, and that's kind of a freebie for both of us. Like, so if you show up, that's what that's for. And so we'll have topical things like that, and then next year we will probably have more. Some of them funded, some of them not. Just professional development workshop type things.
Okay.
So aside from that, if you get excited, like, no one's going to stop you from developing a common intellectual experience. And so it's if you're already having a conversation, it could be like 15 minutes this week that you kind of shoot the breeze with somebody. You think about it for a week, and you come up and say, hey, and you do 15 more minutes of planning. What are you doing in the fall, week 10? You want to do this thing? I've got this thing already planned. You want to join me for it? Because then you've saved them work, because you already have the adventure built. So,
what about LCs that are international, like study abroad LCs?
We haven't been able to fully explore those in a traditional LC sense. We have people who do connections who do study abroad or international connections. I would need more specifics about what you're interested in, and I can do some research. So, but there are options. So it's one of those things. Anything that you want to lean into, if you have an idea, like, we can explore it. And part of me and David's job as co-coordinators is trying to do some of the background work, so you guys don't have to. If you throw an idea at me and you're like, I'm interested in this, what's the possibility? I'll go take some time and find out. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I don't know yet.
Yeah, that's good. had a blast talking with you today. It was so cool to hear what you do in your class and try and just like my brain goes everywhere, thinking about all the cool things that you've got going on and how that might pair with different courses. So I really appreciate you hanging out and talking with me because this was fun.
This was good because I had a chance to learn about learning communities, had a chance to talk about some things I do in class. I had a chance to hear from you in terms of how learning communities sort of connect and work. And the Pocket LC,
It's an option.
maybe for me.
Yeah, it's
Just try to
Gotta
try
look
it
it
out a little bit.
yeah.
So I like that part of it all. And this is such a great experience.
Yeah.
You have all this tech over here. So it's also pretty
I
cool.
feel like it's like a very jerry-rigged setup, but anyways, nobody else.
I don't
needs to
think
know
so. It
that.
doesn't look like Cameron's done at all.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and end, but thank you so much.